the Lord with the 11 were in the orchard of Masalian, and as they talked they saw a band of men with lanterns and with swords and clubs approaching them. And Jesus said, "Behold the emissaries of the evil one, and Judas leads the way." And the disciples said, "Lord, let us flee to save our lives." But Jesus said, "Why should we flee to save our lives when this is the fulfillment of the words of prophets and of seers?" And Jesus went alone to meet the men, and as they came he said, "Why are you here, you men? Whom do you seek?" And they replied, "We seek the man from Galilee. We seek for Jesus, one who calls himself the Christ." And Jesus answered, "Here am I." And then he raised his hands, and with a mighty thought he brought the ethers to the state of light, and all the orchard was aglow with light. The frenzied men were driven back, and many fled and tarried not until they reached Jerusalem, and others fell upon their faces on the ground. The bravest men, and they with hardest hearts, remained, and when the light had paled, the Lord again inquired, "Whom do you seek?" And Ananias said, "We seek the man from Galilee. We seek for Jesus, he who calls himself the Christ." And Jesus answered him and said, "I told you once before, but now I tell you once again that I am he." By Ananias, Judas stood, but in a moment he had gone, and coming up behind the Lord he said, "My Lord," and then he kissed him as a sign that he was Jesus whom they sought. And Jesus said, "Do you, Iscariot, come and thus betray your master with a kiss? This thing must need be done, but woe to him who does betray his Lord. Your carnal greed has seared your conscience, and you know not what you do, but in a little time your conscience will assert itself, and in remorse, lo, look, you will close your span and take your life." Then the 11 came, laid hold of Judas, and would have done him harm, but Jesus said, "You must not harm this man. You have no right to judge this man. His conscience is his judge, will sentence him, and he will execute himself." And then the mob led on by Malchus, servant of Caiaphas, laid hold of Jesus, and was binding him with chains. And Jesus said, "Why do you come in dead of night with swords and clubs to take me in this sacred place? Have I not spoken in the public places of Jerusalem? Have I not healed your sick, and opened up your blinded eyes, and made your lame to walk, your deaf to hear? You could have found me any day. And now you try to bind me down with chains. What are these chains but links of reeds?" And then he raised his hands, the chains were broken, and they fell to earth. And Malchus thought the Lord would flee to save his life, and with a club he gladly would smite him, Jesus, in the face. But Peter had a sword, and rushing up he smote the man, Malchus, and wounded him. But Jesus said, "Stay, Peter, stay, put up your sword. You are not called to fight with swords and clubs. Whoever wields the sword shall perish by the sword. I do not need protection by the sons of men, for I could call this moment in a legion, yes, 12 legions of the messengers of God, would come and stand in my defense, but then it is not well." And then he, Jesus, said to Malchus, "Man, I would not have you harmed," and then he laid his hand upon the wound that Peter made, and it was healed. Then Jesus said, "Be not concerned lest, that is, for fear that, I should tear myself away from you and flee to save my life. I have no wish to save my life, do with me as you wish." And then the mob rushed up to seize the 11 to take them back to stand for trial as the aides of Jesus and his crimes. But the disciples, every one of them, deserted Jesus, and they fled to save their lives. Now, John was last to flee. The mob laid hold of him and tore his garments all to shreds, but he escaped in nakedness. Masalian saw the man, John, and took him to his home, that is, of Masalian, for clarity's sake, and gave him, the naked disciple, other clothes, and then he, a then properly attired John, followed after them who led the Lord away. And Peter was ashamed because of his weak cowardice, and when he was himself again he joined with John and followed close behind the mob, and came into Jerusalem.